The invitation felt heavier than it should have. Cream-colored cardstock, gold embossing, my mother's perfect calligraphy announcing my father's 65th birthday celebration at the Hermitage Hotel. At the bottom, in smaller print that somehow screamed louder than the rest, black tie required, business associates and investors welcome. The message was clear. This wasn't just a birthday party. This was a networking event disguised as a family gathering. And Marcus and I were expected to play our parts as the disappointing daughter and her underachieving husband. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I set the invitation on our kitchen counter next to the stack of bills Marcus had been organizing that morning. Our modest duplex in East Nashville felt worlds away from the Belle Meade mansion where I'd grown up. And according to my family, that distance measured more than just miles. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Marcus asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, his hair still messy from sleep. He wore the same faded Vanderbilt t-shirt he'd had since graduate school, the one my sister Jessica always wrinkled her nose at during family dinners. I looked at him. Really looked at him. After 3 years of marriage, he still made coffee exactly how I liked it, still listened to my work frustrations without trying to fix everything, still treated my dreams like they mattered even when my own family didn't. The Mitchell family had made it abundantly clear that Sarah Mitchell Williams had married beneath her station. "They need to see us," I said, accepting the warm mug. "They need to see that we're not ashamed." Marcus's smile was gentle but knowing. He had secrets behind those dark eyes, depths my family had never bothered to explore. To them, he was just the quiet guy with the old Honda who worked as a freelance financial consultant and couldn't afford to take their daughter on proper vacations. 3 years earlier, my world had been exactly what the Mitchell family expected. I was 28, working as a junior partner at Mitchell & Associates, our family's accounting firm that had served Nashville's music industry elite for 3 generations. My corner office overlooked Music Row, my BMW sat in the reserved parking space with my name on it, and my social calendar was filled with charity galas and country club events. The family business was my birthright, or so everyone assumed. My father, Robert Mitchell, had built on my grandfather's foundation, turning a small CPA practice into the go-to firm for record labels, music publishers, and entertainment lawyers throughout the Southeast. My older brother, Kevin, was being groomed for the executive track, while my sister Jessica had married David Barnes, whose family owned the largest music venue management company in Tennessee. I was supposed to find someone suitable, someone from our social circle who understood the weight of the Mitchell name and the expectations that came with it. Someone like Bradley Whitmore, the investment banker my mother kept inviting to family dinners, who talked about quarterly earnings with the same passion most people reserved for their hobbies. Instead, I met Marcus Williams in the most ordinary way possible. I was grabbing coffee between classes at Vanderbilt, where I was taking night courses in nonprofit management, something my family considered a harmless hobby that would look good on charity board applications. He was at the next table, laptop open, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, completely absorbed in his work. When his coffee spilled across his keyboard, I offered my napkins without thinking. When he thanked me with a smile that reached his eyes, I forgot why I was supposed to care about pedigree and social status. When he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, I said yes before my practical Mitchell brain could interfere. Our first date was at a small Italian place in Music Valley. Nothing fancy, no valet parking, or wine lists that required translation. Marcus asked about my work, my goals, my thoughts on everything from local politics to travel dreams. He listened like my answers actually mattered, like I was more than just a name on a business letterhead. He told me he worked in financial consulting, helping small businesses optimize their investments and growth strategies. He was passionate about sustainable development and emerging technologies, though he spoke about complex market theories the way other people discussed the weather, casual and unassuming. He drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near campus, but he seemed content in a way that the country club crowd never managed despite their luxury cars and waterfront homes. My family's reaction to Marcus was exactly what I'd expected and worse than I'd hoped. The first time I brought him to Sunday dinner at Belmont Manor, my mother Patricia spent the entire evening asking pointed questions about his background, his family, his career prospects. She managed to make financial consultant sound like a euphemism for unemployment. "Where exactly did you go to school, Marcus?" she asked over the second course, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer wouldn't meet her standards. "University of Chicago for undergrad, Wharton for my MBA." He replied, calmly cutting his steak with the same focused attention he gave everything else. Even Kevin looked surprised, but my mother recovered quickly. "And you've chosen to work independently rather than with an established firm?" I preferred the flexibility. It allows me to focus on projects that align with my values rather than just chasing billable hours. Jessica exchanged a look with David that I caught from across the table. The look that said they were already discussing Marcus's lack of ambition and what it meant for the family's reputation. The interrogation continued through dessert and coffee, each question designed to highlight what Marcus wasn't. He wasn't from an established Nashville family, didn't belong to the right clubs, didn't drive the right car, didn't work for the right company. He answered every question with patience and honesty, never defensive, never trying to impress anyone with exaggerations or name-dropping. After he left that evening, the family meeting convened in my father's study without me being invited. I heard the murmured conversation through the heavy oak doors, caught fragments about settling and expectations and what people will think. When they finally called me in, my father was standing behind his massive mahogany desk, the same one he'd taught me to balance checkbooks when I was 12. The room smelled of leather and old money, walls lined with degrees and awards and photographs of the Mitchell family, with various music industry celebrities. "Sarah, we need to discuss your future," he began, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used during board meetings. "You're at a critical point in your career, and the choices you make now will affect not just you, but this entire family." My mother sat in the wingback chair near the fireplace, her expression carefully neutral. "We're not saying Marcus isn't a nice young man," she added, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But marriage is about more than feelings, dear. It's about building a life together, about shared goals and compatible backgrounds." Jessica leaned forward from the couch where she sat with David. "You've worked so hard to establish yourself in this business, Sarah. Why would you want to complicate that with someone who doesn't understand our world?" Kevin, who had been silent until then, finally spoke from his position near the window. "The firm is entering a crucial growth phase. We need partners who can contribute to our expansion, both professionally and socially. Marcus seems like a good guy, but what exactly does he bring to the table?" I looked around the room at the four people who had shaped my entire life, who had given me every advantage and opportunity, who claimed to want only my happiness. "He brings himself," I said simply. "He makes me happy." My father's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "Happiness is important, Sarah, but it's not everything. You're 28 years old, established in your career, ready to take on more responsibility in the family business. You need a partner who can support those goals, who understands the obligations that come with the Mitchell name." "Someone like Bradley Whitmore," my mother added, not quite managing to keep the hope out of her voice. The conversation continued for another hour, circling around the same points with increasing frustration on both sides. They weren't telling me to break up with Marcus, not directly. They were simply making it clear that as long as I chose him, I was choosing to disappoint them. 6 months later, when Marcus proposed during a quiet dinner at the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date, I said yes without hesitation. The ring was simple, elegant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elegant, clearly chosen with thought and care rather than to impress anyone else. He told me he loved me, that he wanted to build a life together, that he believed we could create something beautiful if we focused on what really mattered.
The engagement announcement in the Nashville scene was smaller than my family was used to, lacking the social prominence they expected for a Mitchell wedding. The guest list for our ceremony caused weeks of tension, with my mother insisting on inviting business associates and family friends, while Marcus and I wanted something intimate and meaningful. We compromised, as couples do, but the wedding itself became a showcase of everything my family found lacking about Marcus. His side of the church was smaller, less elaborately dressed, more genuinely joyful. His parents, who had driven down from Illinois, were warm and welcoming, but clearly out of their element among Nashville's social elite. During the reception at Belle Meade Country Club, I watched my new husband navigate conversations with music industry executives and old Nashville families, always polite, never quite fitting in. He didn't golf, he didn't hunt, didn't have opinions about which private schools would be best for our future children. He talked about financial markets and sustainable technology with the same quiet intelligence he brought to everything. But those weren't topics that impressed the country club crowd. My father's toast was perfectly crafted and diplomatically delivered, welcoming Marcus to the family while managing to highlight his unique perspective and different background. Jessica's maid of honor speech was similarly coded, emphasizing how Marcus challenges Sarah to think outside her comfort zone in a way that suggested this wasn't entirely positive. The gifts were telling, too. My family's friends gave crystal and silver, traditional wedding presents that belonged in the kind of home they expected me to maintain. Marcus's colleagues and friends gave practical items, books, things that suggested they knew us as individuals rather than as representatives of a family legacy. After our honeymoon, a modest trip to Colorado that my mother described as adventurous, in a tone that made it sound like criticism, we settled into our duplex in East Nashville. The neighborhood was up and coming, full of young professionals and artists, but it wasn't Belle Meade. Our neighbors were musicians and teachers and small business owners, people who valued creativity and authenticity over pedigree and connections. Marcus set up his home office in our spare bedroom, a simple space with a desk, 2 monitors, and shelves lined with financial textbooks and investment journals. He worked odd hours, taking calls early in the morning and late at night, always apologizing for the disruption. His clients seemed to be scattered across different time zones, small businesses and startups that needed guidance on growth strategies and investment planning. The work appeared to pay well enough. We weren't struggling, exactly. But we weren't living the lifestyle my family expected for a Mitchell daughter. We drove used cars, shopped at Target instead of the boutiques on West End, took vacations to national parks instead of European capitals. Marcus insisted on splitting household expenses equally, which my mother found both admirable and concerning. A husband should be able to provide for his wife, she said during one of our monthly lunches at the country club, stirring sugar into her iced tea with more force than necessary. I'm not saying Marcus isn't trying, but there's something to be said for financial security. These conversations became a regular feature of family gatherings. My father would ask pointed questions about Marcus's work, fishing for details about his client base and growth prospects. Kevin would mention job openings at various Nashville firms, opportunities for Marcus to join more established organizations. Jessica would share stories about David's latest business successes, always framed as casual updates, but clearly designed to highlight the contrast. Marcus endured it all with patience that sometimes frustrated me, and grace that always impressed me. He never got defensive, never tried to prove himself through exaggeration or false confidence. He answered their questions honestly, listened to their suggestions politely, and maintained his dignity even when their implications were clear.
Holiday moments. The conversation had turned to business, as it always did, with my father discussing the firm's expansion plans and Kevin outlining his vision for new service offerings. We're looking at opening a satellite office in Atlanta, my father announced, carving the prime rib with ceremonial precision. The music industry there is growing rapidly, and we want to establish ourselves before the competition catches up. That's exciting, I said, genuinely interested in the family business despite my growing distance from it. What's the timeline? We're hoping to have everything in place by fall, Kevin replied. Of course, we'll need to staff it properly, probably transfer some senior associates to get things started. David leaned forward, his investment banker instincts engaged. Have you considered the capital requirements? Atlanta real estate isn't cheap, and you'll need significant operating capital to establish credibility in a new market. My father nodded approvingly. David always asked the right questions, always understood the financial implications. We're exploring several funding options, traditional business loans, maybe bringing in some limited partners who understand the industry. You know, Jessica said, glancing at Marcus and then at me, it might be worth consulting with someone who has experience in business expansion and growth funding, someone who could analyze the market potential and help structure the financing. The suggestion hung in the air for a moment before my mother picked it up. That's a wonderful idea. Sarah, you should mention this to Marcus. It could be a good opportunity for him to work with established businesses instead of just startups. All eyes turned to Marcus, who had been quietly enjoying his dinner while listening to the conversation. He looked up, considered the faces around the table, and smiled that patient smile I'd come to know so well. I appreciate the thought, he said carefully, but I'm not really set up to handle projects of that scale. My practice focuses on smaller clients who need more hands-on guidance. Kevin's expression shifted slightly, the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle. What exactly is the scope of your current client base? I mean, roughly, how many businesses are you advising? Marcus took a sip of wine before answering. It varies, depending on the quarter, but usually somewhere between 15 and 20 active engagements. And these are all small businesses? My father asked, his accountant's mind clearly calculating potential revenue. Mostly emerging companies, yes. Technology startups, sustainable energy ventures, that sort of thing. Jessica exchanged another one of those looks with David. It sounds like interesting work, but I imagine the revenue must be pretty unpredictable. Startups fail so often. Some do, but the ones that succeed can be quite rewarding to work with. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed the family's attention lingering on Marcus throughout the evening. They were trying to figure him out, to understand how their daughter's husband fit into their carefully ordered world. His calm responses and modest descriptions only deepened their confusion, and, I suspect, their concern about my choices. Later that night, as we drove home through Nashville's quiet holiday streets, Marcus was unusually thoughtful. Our duplex looked small and dark compared to the mansion we'd just left, but it felt more like home than Belmont Manor ever had. Do you ever regret it? He asked as we got ready for bed. Choosing me over their expectations? I looked at him in the dim light of our bedroom. This man who had given me 3 years of genuine partnership and quiet support, who had never once asked me to be anything other than myself. Never, I said, and meant it completely. But I knew the question would keep coming, in different forms from different family members, until something changed. What I didn't know was that change was already coming, and it would transform everything my family thought they understood about the choices I'd made and the man I'd married. The months following that Christmas dinner brought subtle but persistent pressure from my family. My mother began forwarding job listings to Marcus, always with cheerful notes about opportunities that might interest you. My father started including him in conversations about business strategy and market analysis, testing his knowledge while ostensibly seeking his opinion. Kevin was the most direct, approaching Marcus at a family barbecue with what he probably thought was helpful career advice. You know, the financial services industry in Nashville is really exploding right now. A guy with your education and experience could probably land a solid position with any of the major firms downtown. Marcus listened politely, asked thoughtful questions about the local market, and thanked Kevin for the information. But he never followed up on any of the suggestions, never expressed interest in abandoning his independent practice for the security of a corporate position. This only reinforced my family's belief that Marcus lacked ambition, that he was content to drift along in his small-scale consulting practice while his wife's family offered him opportunities for real advancement. They began speaking about him in the tone people use when discussing a beloved but impractical relative, affectionate but tinged with disappointment. The tension reached its peak during a spring dinner party my parents hosted for potential investors in their Atlanta expansion.
The evening was designed to showcase Mitchell and Associates' expertise and connections, with carefully selected guests who could provide both capital and credibility for the new venture. Marcus and I arrived to find the house filled with Nashville's financial elite, music industry executives, and old money families who had been investing in local businesses for generations. The conversation flowed around topics we were expected to navigate effortlessly: market trends, industry developments, social connections that opened doors and created opportunities. I watched Marcus move through the room with his characteristic quiet confidence, listening more than speaking, asking thoughtful questions when drawn into conversations. He seemed genuinely interested in the other guests' work and perspectives, but he didn't try to impress anyone with name-dropping or exaggerated claims about his own success. Near the end of the evening, I overheard a conversation that made my stomach tighten with familiar frustration. My mother was speaking with Eleanor Thornton, whose husband, Richard, controlled one of Nashville's largest investment funds, about the challenges of modern family dynamics. It's so difficult when the younger generation doesn't
Share the same priorities, my mother was saying, her voice carrying just far enough for me to catch the words. Sarah is such a bright girl, so capable, but sometimes I wonder if she's settling for less than she deserves. Eleanor nodded sympathetically. Young people today seem to prioritize different things: happiness over security, passion over practicality. Exactly, my mother continued. Marcus is a lovely man, very intelligent, but he doesn't seem to have much drive for advancement. Sarah could have had her pick of successful young men in this city. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but before I could decide whether to interrupt or retreat, Marcus appeared at my side with 2 glasses of wine and a gentle smile that suggested he'd heard nothing. Ready to head home? He asked quietly. I have an early call tomorrow. We made our polite goodbyes and drove home in silence, but I could feel the weight of unspoken thoughts filling the space between us. Marcus seemed lost in his own reflections, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That night, as we lay in our modest bedroom listening to the sounds of East Nashville settling into sleep, Marcus spoke into the darkness with unusual intensity. Sarah, what would you say if I told you things aren't exactly what they seem? I turned toward him, trying to make out his features in the dim light filtering through our curtains. What do you mean? He was quiet for so long I thought he might have changed his mind about speaking. When he finally continued, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. What if everything your family thinks they know about me, about us, about what we're building together, is based on assumptions that aren't quite accurate? Marcus, you're scaring me a little. What are you talking about? He rolled onto his side to face me, his hand finding mine in the darkness. I'm talking about tomorrow night at your father's birthday party. I'm talking about Richard Thornton and the other investors who will be there, looking for opportunities they don't even know exist yet. My heart began beating faster, though I wasn't sure why. What does Richard Thornton have to do with anything? Marcus's smile was visible even in the dark, and for the first time in 3 years of marriage, I realized there were depths to my husband that I'd never fully explored. Everything, he said simply, and after tomorrow night, your family is going to understand exactly what kind of man you married. Part 2, The Hidden Truth. The morning of my father's birthday celebration arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Nashville feel sophisticated, like the city was dressing up for an important occasion. I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting the neckline of the black cocktail dress I'd bought specifically for tonight, wondering if it struck the right balance between elegant and understated. Marcus emerged from the bathroom wearing a charcoal suit I'd never seen before, perfectly tailored and obviously expensive. The transformation was subtle but complete. Gone was the casual professor look he usually favored, replaced with something that whispered wealth without shouting it. New suit? I asked, running my hand along the lapel. The fabric felt like silk and money. I've had it for a while, he said, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease. Just never had the right occasion. There was something different about him this morning, an undercurrent of anticipation that made me study his reflection in the mirror. His movements were more deliberate, his expression more focused, like an actor preparing for a particularly important performance. We drove to the Hermitage Hotel in his Honda Civic, a choice that now seemed almost deliberately ironic.
The valet's barely concealed disdain as he took the keys from a man in a $1,000 suit driving a 15-year-old car would have been amusing if it weren't for perfectly emblematic of everything my family had been saying about my husband for 3 years. The grand ballroom had been transformed into my mother's vision of sophisticated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linen, each centerpiece a careful arrangement of white roses and baby's breath. The guest list read like a who's who of Nashville's business and entertainment elite. Exactly the kind of networking event my father loved, disguised as a family celebration. My parents stood near the entrance, greeting arrivals with the practiced grace of people who had been hosting important gatherings their entire adult lives. My mother wore midnight blue silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while my father looked distinguished in his tuxedo, every inch the successful patriarch surrounded by his life's achievements. Jessica and David had claimed a prime table near the small stage where a jazz quartet played sophisticated background music. They were deep in conversation with another couple I recognized from various country club events, the kind of people who measured success by zip codes and club memberships. Kevin worked the room with the focused intensity of someone building his own network, moving from group to group with handshakes and business cards, already positioning himself as the next generation of Mitchell leadership. He had always been good at reading a room, at understanding which conversations mattered and which connections could prove valuable. Marcus and I made our way through the crowd, stopping to exchange pleasantries with family friends and business associates. I watched my husband navigate these interactions with his usual quiet confidence, but tonight, there was something different. He listened with more intensity, asked more specific questions, seemed to be gathering information rather than simply making polite conversation. When we reached my parents, my mother's smile was warm but carefully modulated, the expression she reserved for occasions when family obligations required graciousness despite personal reservations. "Sarah, darling, you look beautiful. And Marcus, so good to see you. That's a lovely suit." "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus replied, shaking my father's hand with a firmness that seemed to surprise the older man. "Congratulations on the milestone, Mr. Mitchell. 65 years and such an impressive legacy." My father's expression softened slightly. Compliments about his achievements always had that effect. "Thank you, Marcus. We're hoping tonight will be about more than just celebration. Some exciting business developments in the works." "So I've heard," Marcus said, and something in his tone made me glance at him sharply. "The Atlanta expansion sounds ambitious. You know about that?" Kevin appeared at my father's shoulder, surprise evident in his voice. Marcus nodded easily. "Sarah mentioned it. Smart move getting established in that market before it becomes too crowded."
Oversaturated. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but I found myself studying my husband's face, trying to understand the subtle shift in his demeanor. He spoke about market analysis and expansion strategies with casual expertise, dropping observations about the Atlanta business climate that suggested more than passing familiarity with the subject. As we moved away from my parents to find our assigned table, I caught Marcus checking his phone with an urgency I rarely saw from him. The screen showed several missed calls and text messages, but he dismissed them quickly when he noticed my attention. "Work emergency?" I asked. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow," he said, but his fingers lingered over the phone like he was resisting the urge to respond immediately. Our table was strategically positioned with a clear view of the entire room, close enough to the main action to be included, but far enough away to observe without being overheard. The other couples seated with us were family friends and business associates, the kind of people who had watched me grow up and still remembered me as Bobby Mitchell's little girl who used to hide under the reception desk at the office. The conversation flowed around familiar topics: property values in Belmead, the latest Nashville restaurant openings, speculation about which country music stars were planning new business ventures. Marcus contributed thoughtfully when drawn into discussions, but I noticed him scanning the room periodically, as if waiting for someone or something. The keynote presentation began after the main course, with my father taking the stage to thank everyone for celebrating with him and to share some exciting news about the family business. He spoke eloquently about building on tradition while embracing innovation, about expanding their reach while maintaining their commitment to personalized service. Which brings me to some very exciting news.
he continued, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Mitchell & Associates is pleased to announce our partnership with Thornton Investment Group to fund our expansion into the Atlanta market. Applause filled the room as Richard Thornton joined my father on stage, the two men shaking hands while photographers captured the moment. Thornton was exactly what central casting would order for a successful investor. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, radiating the kind of authority that came from controlling vast amounts of other people's money. This partnership represents more than just capital, Thornton said into the microphone, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. It's about recognizing excellence and supporting businesses that understand how to build lasting value in changing markets. More applause, more photographs, more networking conversations sparked by the announcement. I watched my family members glow with pride and satisfaction, finally achieving the kind of recognition and financial backing they had been pursuing for years. But I also noticed Marcus pulling out his phone again, this time answering a call despite the ongoing presentation. He stepped away from the table, speaking quietly into the device, while keeping his eyes on the stage. When he returned, his expression had shifted into something I couldn't quite identify. "Everything okay?" I whispered. "Perfect timing," he murmured back, but wouldn't elaborate despite my questioning look. The formal program concluded with toasts and more networking, the kind of extended celebration that allowed business conversations to continue over dessert and after dinner drinks. I found myself separated from Marcus as various family members pulled me into different conversations, catching up on my work and asking the usual questions about our future plans. Jessica cornered me near the dessert table, her smile bright, but her eyes calculating. "So, how are things going with Marcus's business? Any growth prospects on the horizon?" "He stays pretty busy," I replied carefully, unwilling to provide ammunition for family gossip. "His clients seem happy with his work?" "That's good, but," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that David was mentioning how many opportunities there are in Nashville right now for someone with financial expertise. Established firms are hiring, and the benefits can be so much better than independent consulting." I was about to respond when a commotion near the main entrance caught my attention. A small group of well-dressed individuals had arrived, and their presence was causing a subtle ripple of recognition through the crowd. I didn't recognize them immediately, but their expensive clothes and confident bearing suggested they belonged to whatever level of Nashville society existed above my family's already elevated position. Marcus appeared at my side with remarkable timing, his hand touching my elbow gently. "Sarah, there are some people I'd like you to meet." Before I could ask what he meant, he was guiding me across the room toward the newcomers. As we approached, I realized that the conversation around us was growing quieter, heads turning to track our movement with curiosity and speculation. The woman leading the group was probably in her early 50s, with sleek black hair and the kind of understated elegance that screamed serious money. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than my car, and her jewelry was the kind of subtle perfection that only came from the world's best designers. "Amanda," Marcus said warmly, embracing the woman like an old friend. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "Though I have to admit that I'm curious about this mysterious announcement you've been promising." Marcus turned to me with a smile that seemed to contain layers of meaning I was only beginning to understand. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Amanda Chen, my business partner. Amanda, this is my wife, Sarah." Business partner. The words hit me like cold water, not because they were threatening, but because they were completely unexpected. In 3 years of marriage, Marcus had never mentioned having a business partner, had always described his consulting practice as a solo operation. Amanda extended her hand with genuine warmth. "Sarah, it's such a pleasure to finally meet you. Marcus talks about you constantly." "Finally meet me?" I managed, shaking her hand while my mind raced to process this new information. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Marcus has never mentioned—" "That's my fault entirely," Marcus interrupted gently. "I've been very careful about keeping my personal and professional lives separate, maybe too careful. But tonight seemed like the right time to change that." Expression shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise, and then something that looked almost like concern. "Amanda Chen," he said, extending his hand with the kind of careful respect reserved for equals. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight." "Richard," Amanda replied smoothly, "always a pleasure. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but Marcus invited me to join tonight's festivities." The conversation around us had grown noticeably quieter, and I became aware that we were attracting attention from across the room. My father was making his way toward us, his expression curious but welcoming in the way that came naturally when meeting potential business contacts. "Mr. Thornton," my father said as he approached, "I hope you're enjoying the evening. Is there someone you'd like me to meet?" Thornton's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. "Robert, I'd like you to meet Amanda Chen, and—" He glanced at Marcus with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been introduced." "Marcus Williams," my husband said, extending his hand with perfect composure, "Sarah's husband." "Of course," Thornton replied, shaking Marcus's hand while his eyes moved between Amanda and my husband with growing recognition. Williams. I should have made the connection. My father looked between the three of them with polite confusion. "Connection?" Amanda smiled, and suddenly I understood that whatever was about to happen had been carefully orchestrated. "Mr. Mitchell, your son-in-law is being modest. Marcus and I have been working together for several years now." "Working together? How?" my father asked, his accountant's mind clearly trying to process the implications. "Williams Chen Capital Management," Marcus said, simply, as if those 4 words explained everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Thornton's face had gone pale, and my father was staring at Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time. Around us, the conversations had stopped entirely, and I realized that everyone within hearing distance was now focused on our small group. "Williams Chen Capital Management," Thornton repeated slowly. "The private equity firm." Amanda nodded confirmation. "We specialize in early-stage technology investments and sustainable energy ventures. Perhaps you've heard of us." My father's voice came out strained. "Heard of you? You're only the most successful investment firm in the Southeast. Your portfolio companies are worth approximately $4.7 billion as of last quarter, though valuations can fluctuate depending on market conditions." The world seemed to tilt sideways. $4.7 billion. My husband, who drove a Honda Civic and worried about splitting grocery bills, was discussing billions of dollars like other people talked about weather forecasts. Kevin had appeared at my father's side, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic. Jessica and David were pushing through the crowd behind him, drawn by the obvious drama unfolding in the center of the room. "I don't understand," my father said, looking directly at Marcus. "You're a financial consultant. You work with small businesses." "I do work with small businesses. I help them grow into large businesses. Some of them grow into very large businesses." Amanda pulled out her phone and showed the screen to my father. "Perhaps you recognize some of our portfolio companies. Green Tech Solutions, Meridian Energy Systems, Nashville Healthcare Innovation." My father's face went completely white. Those were names everyone in Nashville's business community knew. Companies that had transformed from startups into major employers and economic drivers over the past 5 years. "Those are all," my father began, then stopped, apparently unable to finish the sentence. "Companies that Marcus identified, funded, and guided through their growth phases," Amanda completed. "He has quite remarkable instincts for recognizing potential." Jessica's voice cut through the stunned silence, shrill with disbelief. "That's impossible! Marcus lives in East Nashville. He drives a 15-year-old car." Marcus turned to my sister with the same patient expression he'd worn through 3 years of family gatherings. "Jessica, where I live and what I drive have very little to do with my net worth. I prefer to invest my money in businesses rather than status symbols." "Your net worth," Kevin repeated faintly. "Personal net worth is a private matter," Amanda interjected diplomatically. "But I can say that Marcus is the majority partner in our firm, and we've been very fortunate in our investments." Richard Thornton, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, finally found his voice. "Marcus, when you said you preferred working with smaller clients, you meant you were choosing your investments rather than taking whatever business walked through the door." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "Though I should clarify that Williams Chen doesn't just provide capital. We're very hands-on with our portfolio companies, providing strategic guidance and operational support throughout their development." My mother had joined our growing circle, her face a careful mask that didn't quite hide her shock. Marcus, dear, why didn't you ever mention any of this? Marcus looked at me before answering, his expression gentle but serious. Because I wanted to be sure that the woman I loved me for who I am, not what I own. And I wanted to be certain that her family's eventual acceptance of me would be based on my character rather than my bank account. The words hung in the air like an indictment, polite but devastating in their quiet honesty. Around us, the entire ballroom had gone silent, 300 of Nashville's most prominent citizens straining to hear every word of a conversation that was rewriting everything they thought they knew about the Mitchell family dynamics. Amanda checked her watch discreetly. Marcus, we should probably discuss the announcement. Our board members are expecting an update tonight. Announcement? My father managed. Marcus nodded, his professional demeanor taking over completely. Williams Chen has been approached by several Nashville-based businesses seeking capital for expansion projects. We've been evaluating opportunities that align with our investment philosophy and could benefit from our expertise. He paused, letting the implications settle before continuing. We're particularly interested in established companies with strong regional reputations that are ready to scale their operations into new markets. Richard Thornton's expression had shifted from shock to something approaching calculation. Companies like Mitchell and Associates, among others, Amanda confirmed. The Atlanta market represents significant opportunities for the right kind of company.
Business services firm, particularly one with deep industry expertise and established client relationships. My father's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Are you saying you're interested in investing in our expansion? Marcus smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was the same warm expression I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. I'm saying we've been watching Mitchell and Associates for some time, and we believe it has exceptional potential for growth. The question is whether you'd be interested in working with us. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Then Richard Thornton began to laugh, not unkindly, but with genuine amazement. Robert, he said, clapping my father on the shoulder, you've been sitting on the most successful investment opportunity in the Southeast for 3 years, and you didn't even know it. My father looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at Marcus. You're serious about this? Completely serious, Amanda answered. Williams Chen would like to propose a partnership that would provide capital for the Atlanta expansion, ongoing strategic support, and access to our network of business contacts throughout the region. But why? Jessica's voice was strained, almost desperate. Why would you want to help us after the way we've treated you? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. Because despite everything, you're Sarah's family. And because Mitchell & Associates is exactly the kind of business we love to work with. Established, principled, and ready to grow. He looked around the circle of stunned faces before continuing, but mostly because I believe that success shared with family means more than success achieved alone. The crowd around us had grown to include most of the ballroom, and I realized that my father's birthday celebration had just become the most talked about business event of the Nashville social season. Phones were discreetly appearing as people began texting and calling to share the news with those who weren't present to witness it firsthand. Amanda pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to my father. These are our preliminary terms should you decide you're interested in moving forward. Take your time reviewing them, but don't take too long. We have other opportunities under consideration. My father accepted the folder with hands that trembled slightly. I'll need to discuss this with my team, of course. Of course, Marcus agreed, though I should mention that our due diligence process is quite thorough. We'll want to review all financial records, client relationships, and operational procedures before finalizing any agreement. Kevin found his voice for the first time since the revelations began. You want to audit us? We want to understand exactly what we're investing in, Amanda clarified. Williams Chen doesn't make commitments lightly, and we expect the same level of seriousness from our partners.
The conversation continued for another few minutes, covering logistics and timelines and next steps. But I found myself watching my family's faces more than listening to the words. The mixture of shock, embarrassment, and dawning hope was almost painful to witness. When Amanda and her colleagues finally excused themselves to return to what she described as other obligations, the ballroom erupted in conversation. Every person in the room had just witnessed the most dramatic reversal of fortune in recent Nashville social history, and the story would be told and retold at dinner parties and business meetings for months to come. My father stood holding the folder like it contained either salvation or damnation, his lifetime of careful business planning suddenly replaced by an opportunity he could never have imagined. My mother kept glancing between Marcus and me as if trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces had been rearranged when she wasn't looking. Marcus took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Ready to go home?" he asked quietly. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the evening's revelations and their implications. We made our polite goodbyes, accepting congratulations and fielding questions that we deflected with promises to discuss everything later, when there was more privacy and time to process what had happened. As we walked toward the exit, my father caught up with us, still carrying the folder that had changed everything. "Marcus," he said, his voice uncertain in a way I'd never heard before, "I owe you an apology. We all do." My husband stopped and turned, his expression kind but serious. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Mitchell, but you might owe Sarah a conversation about why her happiness wasn't enough to earn your respect." The words were delivered without anger or accusation, but they hit their target with devastating accuracy. My father's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment he looked every one of his 65 years. "You're right," he said simply. "We failed her, and we failed you." Marcus nodded acceptance of the admission, then surprised me by stepping forward and embracing my father briefly. "Family is about more than money, Mr. Mitchell, but sometimes money makes it easier to remember what really matters." As we finally left the ballroom and walked toward the valet stand, I realized that everything had changed and nothing had changed. Marcus was still the same man who made coffee exactly how I liked it and listened to my work frustrations without trying to fix everything. But now my family would have to reconcile that man with the billionaire investor who had just offered to save their business expansion. The valet brought around the Honda Civic, and we drove home through Nashville's quiet streets in contemplative silence. Our duplex looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but I understood now that appearances had been deceiving all along. $4.7 billion, I said as we pulled into our driveway. "Give or take," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "And you've been hiding this for 3 years?" "I haven't been hiding anything," he corrected gently. "I've been living my life. The money is just something I have, not something I am." We sat in the car for a moment longer, both of us processing the evening's events and their implications for our future. Finally, Marcus turned to face me fully. "Are you angry?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. Was I angry that my husband had concealed his wealth? That he'd allowed my family to dismiss and belittle him for years while possessing the means to silence their criticism at any time? That he'd let me defend our modest lifestyle and career choices when he could have ended every uncomfortable conversation with a single revelation? "No," I said finally, and realized I meant it. "I'm proud of you for building something amazing and for protecting what we have from everything that money can complicate." Marcus's relief was visible, and he reached across the console to take my hand. "I love you, Sarah Williams. Not Sarah Mitchell, not Sarah Mitchell Hannah,
The daughter of a successful accounting firm, not the woman whose family finally approves of her choices. I love you." As we walked toward our front door, I understood that tomorrow would bring changes we couldn't fully anticipate. My family would want to rebuild their relationship with Marcus. The Nashville business community would want to understand the dynamics they had completely misread. And our quiet life in East Nashville would probably become significantly more complicated. But tonight, We were still just Sarah and Marcus Williams, coming home to our modest duplex after an evening that had changed everything, while somehow leaving the most important things exactly the same. Part 3. The Morning After. I awoke to the sound of Marcus's voice drifting through our bedroom door, speaking in measured tones that carried the authority I'd witnessed the night before, but never fully recognized. The clock on my nightstand showed 6:47 a.m., and pale autumn sunlight filtered through our curtains, casting everything in soft gold that made our modest bedroom feel somehow different than it had 24 hours ago. "Yes, I understand the timeline pressure," Marcus was saying, his voice coming from the kitchen. "But we need complete financial transparency before we move forward. No exceptions." I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot down the hallway, drawn by curiosity and the rich smell of coffee brewing. Marcus stood at our small kitchen counter, phone pressed to his ear, wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt that somehow looked different now that I knew the man inside them controlled billions of dollars in investments. He noticed me approaching and smiled, the same warm expression that had greeted me every morning for 3 years, though now I wondered what other depths it had been hiding. He gestured toward the coffee maker, already prepared with my preferred blend, the simple domestic ritual unchanged despite everything that had shifted in our world overnight. "I'll call you back in an hour," he said into the phone, then ended the call and turned his full attention to me. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams. Sleep well?" Considering my husband turned out to be a secret billionaire, surprisingly yes, I replied, accepting the coffee mug he offered. "Important business call?" Marcus leaned against the counter, studying my face with the careful attention I'd grown accustomed to, but now understood carried different weight. "Amanda wanted to discuss the Mitchell and Associates proposal before the formal review process begins. Your family's expansion plans are more ambitious than they realize." The casual mention of my family's business situation felt surreal in our small kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary details of our shared life. Yesterday morning, my biggest concern had been whether my dress was appropriate for a country club birthday party. Now, my husband was evaluating my father's company for a multi-million-dollar investment. "Marcus," I began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions tumbling through my mind. "How long have you been planning this?" He considered the question while sipping his coffee, and I recognized the careful thinking that had always characterized his responses to important topics. "I've been aware of Mitchell and Associates' potential for about 18 months. Amanda and I discussed it as a possible investment opportunity, but I asked her to hold off until the timing felt right." "The timing for what?" "For your family to see me clearly, instead of seeing what they expected to see." The simple honesty of his answer hit harder than any elaborate explanation might have. I sank into one of our mismatched kitchen chairs, processing the implications of what he was telling me. You could have ended all those uncomfortable dinner conversations any time you wanted. All those hints about better job opportunities, all the patronizing comments about ambition and financial security. Marcus joined me at the small table, his expression serious, but not defensive. I could have, but proving them wrong with money wouldn't have proven them wrong about what matters. They needed to see that their assumptions about worth and success were flawed, not just incomplete. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against the counter where I had left it charging. The screen showed my mother's contact information, and I realized that the morning after conversations were about to begin, whether I felt ready for them or not. "Sarah, darling, I hope I'm not calling too early." My mother's voice carried its usual careful modulation, but underneath I detected an uncertainty that was entirely new. "We're wondering if you and Marcus might be available for lunch today. We'd love to discuss last night's developments." I glanced at Marcus, who nodded with the patient expression that had carried him through 3 years of family gatherings. "We'd be happy to have lunch, Mom. What time works for you?" "Would noon at the club be suitable? Nothing formal, just family."
The emphasis on just family wasn't lost on me. After 3 years of treating Marcus like a well-meaning outsider, my parents were finally ready to acknowledge him as an actual member of the Mitchell clan, now that his membership came with significant financial benefits. After ending the call, I turned back to Marcus, who was scrolling through messages on his own phone with focused attention. The number of notifications seemed endless, and I realized that Williams Chen Capital Management probably required more daily management than I had ever imagined. "Busy day ahead?" I asked. "Always," he replied, then looked up with a slight smile. "But nothing that can't be rearranged for family lunch. Though I should warn you, Amanda wants to sit in on the formal presentation next week. She's very thorough about partnership evaluations." The word partnership carried weight that my father would undoubtedly spend considerable time analyzing. Mitchell and Associates had always been a family operation, with carefully controlled growth and conservative decision-making. The prospect of external partnership, particularly with investors of Marcus's caliber, would represent a fundamental shift in how the business operated. My phone buzzed again, this time showing Jessica's number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won over caution. "Sarah, oh my God, I can't stop thinking about last night." David didn't sleep at all. He keeps pulling up articles about Williams Chen Capital Management on his laptop. "Did you know Marcus was featured in Forbes last year?" I looked at Marcus, who was listening to my side of the conversation with amused resignation. "No, I didn't know that."
The business world, and we had no idea. Neither did I admitted, which was becoming a recurring theme in these conversations. Jessica's voice dropped to the conspiratorial tone she'd used since childhood when sharing particularly juicy gossip. "Mom called this morning. She's in full crisis management mode, trying to figure out how to handle the social implications. Half of Nashville is going to be calling today, wanting to know how long we've known about Marcus's business success." The social implications hadn't occurred to me, but I realized Jessica was right. My family's social standing in Nashville depended heavily on their reputation for business acumen and financial success. Having completely misjudged their own son-in-law's wealth and influence would be embarrassing enough without the added complication of having treated him dismissively in front of witnesses for 3 years. "David wants to know if Marcus would be interested in meeting for coffee this week," Jessica continued. "Professional consultation about some investment opportunities he's been considering." I glanced at Marcus again, who was now openly listening and shaking his head with gentle amusement. "I'll ask him," I said diplomatically, though I suspected that David's sudden interest in Marcus's professional opinion had more to do with networking opportunities than genuine investment advice. After ending the call, I found Marcus watching me with the thoughtful expression that usually preceded his most insightful observations. "Regrets?" he asked simply. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret discovering that my husband had been concealing significant wealth throughout our marriage? Did I regret that my family's acceptance of him was now tied to his financial success rather than his character? Did I regret that our quiet life was about to become significantly more complicated? "Only one," I said finally. "I regret that it took billions of dollars for my family to see what I've known all along." Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, the simple gesture carrying the same comfort it always had, regardless of how many zeros had been added to his net worth overnight. "They'll figure it out," he said. "People usually do, eventually." The optimism in his voice reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Despite having every reason to feel vindicated or even vengeful toward my family, Marcus seemed genuinely hopeful about building better relationships moving forward. My phone buzzed a third time, and I groaned when I saw Kevin's name on the screen. If Jessica had been excited and my mother had been diplomatic, I could only imagine what approach my brother would take to processing the previous night's revelations. "Sarah, we need to talk." Kevin's voice was clipped and businesslike, the tone he used during board meetings when discussing serious financial matters. "Can you and Marcus meet me at the office this afternoon, before the family lunch?" "Kevin, it's Saturday morning." "This is important.
I've been reviewing the Williams Chen portfolio all night, and there are things we need to discuss about their investment strategy and what it means for our business model. I looked at Marcus, who was now openly listening and shaking his head with gentle amusement. "I'll ask him," I said diplomatically, though I suspect that David's sudden interest in Marcus's professional opinion had more to do with networking opportunities than genuine investment advice. After ending the call, I found Marcus watching me with the thoughtful expression that usually preceded his most insightful observations. "Regrets?" he asked simply. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret discovering that my husband had been concealing significant wealth throughout our marriage? Did I regret that my family's acceptance of him was now tied to his financial success rather than his character? Did I regret that our quiet life was about to become significantly more complicated? Only one, I said finally. I regret that it took billions of dollars for my family to see what I've known all along. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, the simple gesture carrying the same comfort it always had, regardless of how many zeros had been added to his net worth overnight. "They'll figure it out," he said. "People usually do, eventually." The optimism in his voice reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Despite having every reason to feel vindicated or even vengeful toward my family, Marcus seemed genuinely hopeful about building better relationships moving forward. My phone buzzed a third time, and I groaned when I saw Kevin's name on the screen. If Jessica had been excited and my mother had been diplomatic, I could only imagine what approach my brother would take to processing the previous night's revelations. "Sarah, we need to talk." Kevin's voice was clipped and businesslike, the tone he used during board meetings when discussing serious financial matters. "Can you and Marcus meet me at the office this afternoon, before the family lunch?" "Kevin, it's Saturday morning. This is important. I've been reviewing the Williams 10 portfolio all night, and there are things we need to discuss about their investment strategy and what it means for our business model." I looked at Marcus, who was already nodding his agreement to whatever Kevin was proposing. "Fine. What time?" 10:30. "And Sarah, bring copies of any financial documents Marcus might have mentioned last night. Dad's going to want to see everything before we commit to anything." After hanging up, I realized that the day ahead was going to involve multiple family meetings, each designed to process and respond to information that had fundamentally altered our family dynamics. The Mitchell clan was regrouping, reassessing, and repositioning themselves in response to a reality they hadn't seen coming. Marcus stood and refilled our coffee cups, moving through our kitchen with the same easy familiarity he'd always shown, as if nothing had changed. But I noticed him checking his phone more frequently, responding to messages with the efficiency of someone managing complex business operations across multiple time zones. "Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of when I thought you were just a financial consultant with a small client base?" Marcus paused in his coffee preparation, considering the question with the thoroughness he brought to everything. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not as much as I missed being able to share the whole truth with you." The honesty of his answer reminded me that the secrecy hadn't been entirely comfortable for him either. Building and managing a billion-dollar investment firm while pretending to be a small-scale consultant must have required constant vigilance about what information he shared and with whom. How many people knew about Williams Chen, about what you really do? Amanda, obviously, our legal team, accountants, a few key clients. The business press, though they don't generally cover personal details about family relationships. He smiled wryly. And Mrs. Park from down the street. She figured it out about 6 months ago when she saw Amanda's car in our driveway. Mrs. Park knew before I did? Mrs. Park is very observant. She mentioned that my business visitors didn't match my declared income level and asked if I was involved in anything she should be concerned about. I laughed despite myself, imagining our elderly neighbor conducting her own investigation into Marcus's financial situation. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. She promised to keep it confidential, and she has, though she did start bringing us more expensive wine for dinner invitations." The thought of Mrs. Park adjusting her gift-giving strategy based on Marcus's revealed wealth was somehow both touching and amusing. It occurred to me that navigating relationships after significant financial disclosure was probably a common challenge for people in Marcus's position, though most of them probably didn't spend 3 years pretending to be something they weren't. We spent the next hour reviewing the day's schedule and discussing what topics were likely to arise during the various family meetings. Marcus pulled out a leather portfolio I'd never seen before, filled with documents and financial projections that apparently represented the Williams-Chen valuation of Mitchell and Associates. "You've really been planning this for 18 months?" I asked, scanning the detailed analysis of my family's business operations. "Planning is too strong a word," Marcus corrected. "Evaluating, considering, waiting for the right moment. Your family's business model is solid, but their growth strategy has been too conservative. They have the expertise and reputation to expand much more aggressively than they've been willing to attempt." The analysis was thorough and professionally presented, clearly the work of experienced investment professionals rather than casual observation.
Family business, I began to understand why Amanda had seemed so confident about the potential partnership. "They're going to want to know why," I said, closing the portfolio. "Why you're interested in helping them after the way they've treated you." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring out our kitchen window toward the busy street where our neighbors were beginning their Saturday morning routines. "Because family matters," he said finally, "even when they don't make it easy." At 10:15, we drove to the Mitchell and Associates office building, a converted historic mansion in the Gulch that had been renovated to provide modern business facilities while maintaining its original architectural charm. Kevin's car was already in the parking lot, along with my father's Mercedes, suggesting that this meeting had expanded beyond my brother's original plan. The lobby was quiet on Saturday morning, with only minimal security staff and the kind of weekend stillness that made footsteps echo differently in familiar spaces. We found Kevin and my father in the main conference room, surrounded by printed articles, financial reports, and laptop computers displaying what appeared to be extensive research about Williams-Chen capital management. "Marcus," my father stood as we entered, extending his hand with a formality that seemed intended to acknowledge changed circumstances. "Thank you for coming in on short notice." Kevin gestured toward chairs across from where he and my father had been working. "We've been doing our homework," he said, indicating the papers spread across the conference table. "Williams-Chen Capital Management has an impressive track record." The compliment carried an undertone of amazement, as if Kevin couldn't quite believe he was discussing his brother-in-law's professional achievements rather than his lack of career advancement. The table was covered with printouts of news articles, financial analyses, and business profiles that painted a picture of Marcus as one of the Southeast's most successful young investors. 37 companies in your portfolio," my father said, reading from notes he'd apparently been taking. "Combined valuation of nearly $5 billion, average annual return of 43% over the past 5 years?" Marcus nodded acknowledgement of the figures without seeming particularly impressed by them. "We've been fortunate with our investment choices and timing." "Fortunate?" Kevin repeated, his tone suggesting he found the word inadequate. "Marcus, 3 of your portfolio companies have gone public in the last 2 years. That's not fortune, that's expertise." I watched the conversation unfold with fascination, seeing my father and brother adjust their understanding of Marcus in real time. The same man they'd been politely dismissing for 3 years was now being treated with the deference they usually reserved for their most important clients. My father opened the folder Marcus had provided and began reviewing the Mitchell and Associates analysis. His expression grew increasingly serious as he worked through the financial projections and growth recommendations, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions about specific assumptions. "This is very thorough," he said finally. "You've identified expansion opportunities we haven't even considered. Your business model has strong fundamentals, but you've been thinking too locally. The music industry is national, increasingly international. Mitchell and Associates could serve clients throughout the Southeast, potentially beyond, with the right capital backing and strategic planning."
Kevin leaned forward, his analytical mind clearly engaged with the possibilities Marcus was describing. What kind of capital are we talking about? Marcus pulled out a second document from his portfolio. Initial investment of $12 million for the Atlanta expansion, with additional funding available for further growth as opportunities develop. In exchange, Williams Shen would take a 30% equity stake and provide ongoing strategic consultation. The numbers hung in the air like a challenge to everything my family thought they knew about their business's value and potential. $12 million represented more capital than Mitchell and Associates had ever imagined having access to, enough to transform them from a regional firm into a major player in the industry. 37% equity, my father repeated slowly. That would make Williams Shen our largest outside investor. It would make Williams Shen your partner, Marcus corrected gently. We don't invest in businesses we don't believe in, and we don't take passive roles in companies we're committed to helping succeed. The distinction was important, and I could see my father processing the implications. External investors often focus primarily on financial returns, while partners typically involve themselves more deeply in business operations and strategic decision-making. Kevin was studying the financial projections with the intensity he usually reserved for complex tax problems. These revenue estimates seem aggressive. Are you confident about the market demand for this level of expansion? Very confident, Marcus replied. Amanda and I have been tracking the industry growth patterns, and we believe Mitchell and Associates is positioned to capture a significant share of the expanding market. The question is whether you're ready to think bigger than you have been. My father set down the documents and looked directly at Marcus, his expression serious but no longer skeptical. Why us? With your track record, you could partner with any firm in the country. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I realized he was choosing his words carefully. Because Mitchell and Associates represents everything we look for in a partnership opportunity. Established reputation, strong fundamentals, conservative management that's ready to embrace strategic growth. And because I believe in this family's ability to build something lasting. The sincerity in his voice seemed to affect my father, whose formal business demeanor softened slightly, even after the way we've treated you. Especially because of that, Marcus said simply. You've been protective of your daughter and your business. Those are admirable instincts, even when they're misdirected. Kevin closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, the gesture of someone who had reached a conclusion. What's the timeline for moving forward? Amanda and I would like to conduct a formal due diligence review next week, complete financial audit, operational assessment, market analysis. If everything checks out to our satisfaction, we could have preliminary agreements drafted within 2 weeks. And if it doesn't check out? Marcus smiled, and for the first time during the meeting, I saw the man I'd married instead of the professional investor.
You'll have received a very thorough business analysis at no cost, and you'll know exactly what areas need improvement before approaching other potential partners. The meeting continued for another hour, covering operational details and answering questions about Williams Chen's investment philosophy and partnership expectations. Marcus handled every inquiry with professional competence while maintaining the personal warmth that had attracted me to him originally. As we prepared to leave for the family lunch, my father walked with us toward the elevator, his demeanor noticeably different than it had been 3 years ago when Marcus was first introduced as his daughter's new boyfriend. Marcus, he said as we waited for the elevator to arrive, I owe you an apology that goes beyond business. We misjudged you, and more importantly, we failed to trust Sarah's judgment about what would make her happy. Marcus accepted the apology with the same grace he'd shown throughout the morning's discussions. Family relationships are complicated, Mr. Mitchell. What matters is where we go from here. As the elevator doors closed and we descended toward the parking garage, I realized that the morning's meeting had accomplished something more significant than business planning. My father and Kevin had seen Marcus as himself, rather than as their preconceptions about what he should be, and they'd begun building the foundation for genuine family relationships based on mutual respect, rather than financial necessity. The drive to Belmead Country Club was quiet, both of us lost in thought about the morning's conversations and the family lunch that awaited us. Marcus seemed relaxed, as if the most difficult part of his revelation process was complete, while I found myself anticipating my mother's reaction to learning more details about her son-in-law's professional accomplishments. "Ready for round two?" Marcus asked as we pulled into the club's familiar parking area. "With you?" "Always," I replied, and meant it completely. The country club's dining room was bustling with Saturday lunch activity, but my mother had reserved a private area where family conversations could proceed without drawing attention from other members. As we approached the table, I noticed that she had arranged the seating to place Marcus beside my father, a subtle but significant departure from previous family gatherings where he'd often been positioned at the periphery of important discussions. The next few hours would determine whether my family could build genuine relationships with the man they'd finally begun to see clearly, or whether Marcus's financial success would simply replace their previous misconceptions with new forms of superficial acceptance. Either way, I realized as we joined my parents for lunch, the quiet life Marcus and I had built together was about to become significantly more complicated and significantly more interesting. Part 4. The New Beginning. The country club's private dining room felt different than it had during countless family gatherings over the years. The same mahogany paneling and crystal chandeliers created familiar elegance, but the undercurrent of tension that had characterized every meal involving Marcus had been replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Anticipation, perhaps? Or the careful politeness of people trying to rebuild relationships they'd damaged through their own assumptions. My mother had outdone herself with the lunch arrangements, selecting a menu that balanced sophistication with accessibility, ensuring that conversation could flow without the distraction of overly complicated courses. She wore a soft lavender dress that complemented her carefully styled silver hair, and her movements carried the grace of someone who'd spent decades hosting important social and business gatherings. Marcus pulled out my chair before taking his own seat beside my father, a small gesture that had always been part of his character, but now seemed to carry additional weight. My parents noticed everything differently now, interpreting actions through the lens of revised understanding about who Marcus really was and what his presence in their family actually meant. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering wine," my mother said, gesturing toward the bottle already breathing on a side table. "It's a 2018 Burgundy that Robert particularly enjoys." "That sounds perfect, Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus replied, and I noticed he didn't mention that the wine she'd selected probably cost less than what he spent on coffee beans each month. His ability to gracefully navigate social situations without making others feel inadequate was something I had always admired, though I was only beginning to understand how much restraint it sometimes required. My parents seemed more relaxed than he had during the morning business meeting, though I detected an underlying nervousness that suggested he was still processing the fundamental shift in family dynamics. The man he'd spent 3 years politely tolerating as his daughter's questionable choice in husbands had revealed himself to be one of the most financially successful people he'd ever encountered. "I've been thinking about our conversation this morning," my father began as the first course arrived. "The expansion timeline you outlined is more aggressive than anything we've previously considered, but the market analysis supporting your recommendations is compelling." Marcus nodded thoughtfully while cutting his salmon with practiced precision. "Aggressive growth requires careful planning and adequate capitalization, but the opportunities in Atlanta won't remain available indefinitely. The music industry is evolving rapidly, and firms that establish strong regional presences now will have significant advantages as the market matures." The conversation flowed naturally between personal and professional topics, with Marcus demonstrating the same thoughtful engagement that had always characterized his interactions with my family. But now, my parents were listening differently, recognizing expertise where they had previously heard only polite opinions from someone they considered professionally unestablished. Jessica and David arrived 20 minutes into lunch, their apologies for lateness carrying an urgency that suggested they'd spent considerable time preparing for this conversation. Jessica wore a navy dress that was clearly her most expensive, while David had chosen a suit that announced serious business intentions despite the casual family gathering. "Sorry we're late," Jessica said, kissing my parents' cheeks before taking her seat across from Marcus. David had a client call that ran longer than expected. David shook Marcus's hand with a firmness that hadn't existed in their previous interactions. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind, but I spent most of last night reading about Williams Chen Capital Management. Your portfolio companies are impressive."
Thank you, Marcus replied simply, neither dismissing the compliment nor expanding on his achievements. His ability to acknowledge professional success without seeming boastful was something I'd always appreciated, though I was beginning to understand it was probably a skill he'd developed specifically for situations like this. Kevin joined us as the main course was being served, his expression carrying the focused intensity that usually indicated he'd been working through complex problems. He'd changed from his morning business attire into khakis and a button-down shirt, but his demeanor remained serious and purposeful. "I've been reviewing the partnership proposal," he announced, without preamble, settling into his chair and accepting the wine my mother offered. "The financial projections are sound, but I have questions about operational integration." Marcus set down his fork and gave Kevin his complete attention, the gesture of someone accustomed to addressing detailed business inquiries. "What specific concerns do you have?" "Williams & Chen's portfolio companies operate in technology and sustainable energy sectors," Kevin began, consulting notes he'd apparently brought from his morning research. "Mitchell & Associates focuses on entertainment industry services. How do you see the strategic synergies developing?" The question demonstrated that Kevin had moved beyond simply being impressed by Marcus's wealth to thinking critically about how a partnership would actually function. Marcus's expression suggested he appreciated the analytical approach. "The entertainment industry is undergoing significant technological transformation," Marcus explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had studied market trends extensively. "Music production, distribution, and consumption are increasingly technology-dependent. Artists and entertainment companies need sophisticated financial guidance to navigate digital revenue streams, intellectual property valuations, and global market opportunities." He paused to sip his wine before continuing. "Williams & Chen's technology portfolio companies are developing platforms and systems that entertainment industry clients will need to understand and utilize. Mitchell & Associates could provide the financial expertise to help entertainment clients evaluate and implement these technological solutions." The explanation was comprehensive and delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had clearly thought through every aspect of the proposed partnership. My family listened with the attention they usually reserved for presentations from major potential clients, finally understanding that Marcus possessed genuine strategic thinking abilities rather than just impressive financial resources. David leaned forward, his investment banking background clearly engaged by the discussion. "That's actually brilliant," he said, his voice carrying surprise and admiration. "You're not just providing capital for geographic expansion, you're positioning Mitchell & Associates to become specialists in entertainment industry technology consulting." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "The Atlanta office would serve traditional clients while developing expertise in technology integration services. Within 5 years, Mitchell & Associates could be the premier entertainment industry technology consulting firm in the Southeast." My father's expression had shifted from polite attention to genuine engagement, the look he wore when working through complex business problems that excited his professional instincts. "The market for that kind of specialized consulting would be substantial," he said slowly, clearly processing the implications, "and largely untapped," Marcus added. "Most accounting firms don't understand the technology well enough to provide strategic guidance, and most technology consultants don't understand entertainment industry finances well enough to provide practical implementation advice."
Jessica had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement, and I realized she was witnessing the same revelation I'd experienced the night before. The man she'd spent 3 years viewing as her sister's underachieving husband was outlining business strategies that could transform our family's company into something far more significant than anyone had imagined possible. "Marcus," she said suddenly, interrupting the technical discussion, "why didn't you ever mention any of this before? I mean, you clearly understood our business better than we realized." Marcus considered the question while the table waited for his response. "Because understanding your business and being invited to contribute to its development are different things," he said gently. "I didn't want to seem presumptuous about offering advice when I wasn't sure it would be welcome." The honesty of his answer created a moment of uncomfortable silence as my family processed the implications of what he was saying. They had spent 3 years making Marcus feel like an outsider whose opinions about their business wouldn't be valued, never realizing that his perspective might actually be more sophisticated than their own. My mother broke the silence by refilling wine glasses with the focused attention she usually gave to difficult social situations. She said, "I think we owe you more than just business apologies. We misjudged your character, and we failed to make you feel truly welcome in this family." "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus began, but she held up her hand to stop him. "Please, let me finish," she continued, her voice carrying unusual vulnerability. "I was so concerned about Sarah's future security that I couldn't see she had already found something much more valuable than financial stability. She found a partner who supports her dreams and treats her with respect." The admission seemed to cost my mother considerable effort, and I realized she was acknowledging not just her mistakes about Marcus's financial situation, but her failures to recognize the qualities that had made me fall in love with him originally. Marcus reached across the table and briefly touched my mother's hand, the gesture both gracious and genuine. "Family relationships are complicated. What matters is that we all care about Sarah's happiness." The conversation gradually shifted away from business and toward more personal topics, with my family asking questions about Marcus's background and interests that they'd never bothered to explore during his first 3 years as part of the family. They learned that he had grown up in a middle-class family in Chicago, that his parents were retired teachers who had instilled strong values about education and hard work, and that his business success had developed from genuine passion for identifying and supporting innovative companies. As lunch progressed, I watched the dynamic around the table transform from careful politeness to something approaching genuine family interaction. Told stories about interesting entrepreneurs he'd worked with. My father shared insights about the entertainment industry's evolution over his career, and even Jessica began contributing observations about social media's impact on artist marketing strategies. When Kevin asked about Marcus's investment philosophy, the response revealed depths of thinking about business ethics and social responsibility that impressed everyone present. Williams Chen Capital Management specifically sought out companies that addressed environmental challenges or social inequities, preferring to build wealth through investments that created positive community impact. "It's not just about financial returns," Marcus explained. "Amanda and I believe that sustainable business success requires consideration of broader stakeholder interests, not just investor profits." The conversation continued through dessert and coffee, with my family asking increasingly sophisticated questions about business strategy, market trends, and investment opportunities. Marcus answered everything with patience and insight, never seeming condescending, despite possessing vastly more expertise than anyone else at the table. As the afternoon drew toward evening, my father asked the question that had been underlying much of the day's discussions. "Marcus, assuming our partnership moves forward, how do you see your role in the family business developing?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly considering not just the business implications, but the family relationship aspects of his answer. "I'd like to be a genuine partner in helping Mitchell and Associates grow and succeed," he said finally. "But I'd also like to be Sarah's husband, who happens to have useful business expertise, rather than a business partner who happens to be married to your daughter."
The distinction was important, and I could see my family processing what Marcus was telling them about his priorities and values. He wanted to contribute to the family business success, but he didn't want his relationship with me to become secondary to his professional relationships with my parents and siblings. "I think we can manage that balance," my father said, with a smile that seemed more genuine than any expression he'd directed toward Marcus in 3 years. "Especially since we are apparently going to have plenty of opportunities to work together professionally." As we prepared to leave the country club, my mother surprised me by asking Marcus if he and I would be available for dinner the following weekend, specifically mentioning that she'd like to invite his parents to visit Nashville so the families could meet properly. "I realize we should have made that effort years ago," she said, her voice carrying genuine regret. "Better late than never." Marcus accepted the invitation with obvious pleasure, and I realized that my family was finally ready to treat our marriage as a genuine union worthy of traditional family integration rather than an unfortunate choice they needed to politely tolerate. The drive home was quiet and reflective, both of us processing the day's conversations and their implications for our future. Marcus seemed satisfied but not triumphant, as if the day had unfolded exactly as he'd hoped without providing the vindication that might have been expected. "How do you feel about everything?" I asked as we pulled into our driveway. Marcus considered the question while turning off the engine, his expression thoughtful and calm. "Grateful," he said simply. "Your family is good people who made some mistaken assumptions. Today they had the courage to acknowledge those mistakes and start building something better." That evening, as we sat on our small back patio sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset over East Nashville, I realized that everything had changed and nothing had changed. Marcus was still the same man who listened to my work frustrations and made coffee exactly how I liked it. Our house was still modest and comfortable. Our neighborhood still filled with artists and young professionals rather than Nashville's social elite. But the weight of family disapproval that had shadowed our marriage for 3 years had lifted, replaced with possibilities for genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests. The partnership between Williams Chen Capital Management and Mitchell & Associates would undoubtedly transform my family's business. But more importantly, the honesty that had enabled that partnership had transformed our family relationships. "Do you think they'll be able to handle it, having a billionaire in the family?" Marcus laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "They'll adjust. People are remarkably adaptable when they want to be." "And us? Are we going to be able to handle the complications that come with everyone knowing who you really are?" Marcus reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine the same way they had every evening for 3 years, wealth and recognition changing nothing about the simple gesture that had become our daily ritual. "We have handled everything else," he said simply. "We'll handle this too." As the last light faded from the Nashville sky, I understood that Marcus had been right about timing. My family had needed to see him clearly before they could appreciate him properly, and that clarity had only been possible once they stopped focusing on what he lacked and started recognizing what he offered. The partnership agreement would be signed within 2 weeks, launching Mitchell & Associates into a new phase of growth and success that would establish them as leaders in entertainment industry technology consulting. Amanda Chen would become a regular presence at family gatherings, bringing her own insights about business strategy and international markets that would continue expanding everyone's understanding of what was possible. Kevin would eventually leave the family firm to start his own technology-focused financial services company, with Marcus serving as his primary investor and strategic advisor. Jessica would discover that her social media marketing instincts translated well to entertainment industry consulting, ultimately becoming Mitchell & Associates' Director of Digital Strategy Services. My parents would build genuine relationships with Marcus's family, discovering shared values about education, hard work, and community responsibility that transcended differences in background and financial resources. The annual family gatherings would expand to include both sides of our extended family, creating traditions that celebrated connection rather than status. But all of that was still in the future. That evening, as we cleaned up dinner dishes in our modest kitchen and prepared for another ordinary Sunday morning, we were simply Sarah and Marcus Williams, a couple who had weathered family disapproval and emerged with their relationship stronger and their future brighter than they had dared to imagine.
Marcus's phone buzzed against the counter, displaying a text message from Amanda about Monday morning's board meeting. He glanced at it briefly,
then turned off the phone completely and turned his attention back to loading our dishwasher. "No more work tonight?" I asked. "Family time," he said firmly. "Everything else can wait until tomorrow." The commitment to maintaining balance between professional success and personal relationships had always been part of Marcus's character, though I was only beginning to understand how deliberately he protected our private life from the demands and complications of managing significant wealth. As we settled into bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 3 years of marriage had tested our relationship in ways I couldn't have anticipated. But they had also proven that genuine love could survive family pressure, social expectations, and the revelation of hidden complexity. Marcus had waited 3 years to reveal his true financial situation, not because he was ashamed of his success, but because he wanted to be certain that our marriage was built on authentic connection rather than superficial attraction to wealth and status. The patience and integrity required for such restraint spoke to character qualities that impressed me even more than his business achievements. "Thank you," I said quietly in the darkness of our bedroom. "For what?" "For being exactly who you are, even when it would have been easier to be someone else." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could feel him smiling in the darkness. "Thank you for seeing who I was before anyone else did." The next morning would bring new challenges and opportunities as we began navigating life as a couple whose private struggles had become public knowledge throughout Nashville's business and social communities. Marcus would need to balance increased attention and networking requests with his commitment to maintaining our relationship as his first priority. I would need to adjust to being seen as the woman who had recognized exceptional potential that everyone else had missed, when the truth was simpler and more important than that. I had simply fallen in love with a man who made me happy and treated me with respect, and I had trusted that feeling even when everyone around me suggested I was making a mistake. But those adjustments would come gradually, supported by the foundation of genuine partnership we had built during our first 3 years together. We had learned to communicate honestly about difficult topics, to support each other through family pressure, and to maintain our individual identities while building a shared life. The money would make some things easier and other things more complicated, but it wouldn't change the fundamental dynamics that had made our marriage successful. Marcus would still make coffee exactly how I liked it, still listen to my work frustrations without trying to fix everything, still treat my dreams like they mattered as much as his own achievements. And I would still see him as the man who had chosen to build a life with me based on love, rather than convenience, who had protected our relationship from external pressures even when it required significant personal sacrifice, and who had waited for exactly the right moment to show my family who he really was. The story of how Marcus Williams revealed his true identity to the Mitchell family would become part of Nashville business legend, told and retold at networking events and dinner parties for years to come. But for us, it was simply the moment when we stopped having to explain or defend our choices and started focusing entirely on building the future we wanted together. Sometimes the people who seem to have the least to offer are actually the ones with the most to give. And sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is the opportunity to see past surface appearances to recognize exceptional value that everyone else has overlooked. Marcus had given my family that opportunity, and they had finally been wise enough to accept it. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the new Mitchell & Associates Atlanta office, casting long shadows across the modern workspace that had transformed from ambitious dream to bustling reality in just 6 months. I stood in the conference room overlooking Peachtree Street, watching the city wake up below while waiting for the quarterly board meeting to begin. The office itself was a testament to how quickly things could change when vision met adequate resources. What had once been an impossibly expensive expansion goal had become a sleek, sophisticated operation housing 37 employees and serving clients throughout the Southeast. The Williams-Chen partnership had delivered everything Marcus had promised and more, establishing Mitchell & Associates as the premier entertainment industry technology consulting firm in the region. Amanda Chen arrived precisely on time, as she always did, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had made Williams Chen one of the most respected investment firms in the country. She wore a charcoal gray suit that spoke of serious business intentions, her expression focused but pleased as she surveyed the bustling office activity visible through the conference room's glass walls. "Impressive turnout for a quarterly review," she observed, gesturing towards the employees gathered in the main workspace. 6 months ago, this was just architectural drawings and financial projections. My father entered the conference room with Kevin close behind, both carrying the satisfied expressions of men who had watched their most optimistic expectations exceeded by actual results. The Atlanta expansion had not only met its projected targets, but had attracted major clients from the music, film, and digital entertainment industries who were seeking exactly the kind of specialized consulting services Marcus had envisioned. "The Q2 numbers are extraordinary," Kevin announced without preamble, settling into his chair and opening his laptop with practiced efficiency. "Revenue is running 43% ahead of projections, and we've already received inquiries about expanding into Charlotte and Tampa." Marcus arrived moments later, apologizing for being detained by a conference call with one of Williams Chen's technology portfolio companies. He wore a navy suit that managed to look both expensive and understated, his appearance reflecting the careful balance he maintained between acknowledging his wealth and avoiding ostentatious displays of success. "Sorry for the delay," he said, taking his seat beside Amanda. "The renewable energy sector is moving faster than anticipated, and we needed to discuss acceleration timelines for 3 of our portfolio companies." The casual mention of managing billion-dollar investment decisions had become
routine in family business meetings, though I still occasionally marveled at how naturally Marcus shifted between discussing entertainment industry consulting strategies and coordinating complex technology investments across multiple time zones. David joined us via video conference from Nashville, his image appearing on the large monitor mounted on the conference room wall. His investment banking background had proved invaluable in structuring client relationships and identifying additional partnership opportunities that were already generating significant revenue growth. "The client retention rate is running at 97%, David reported, consulting notes from his Nashville office. And more importantly, client referrals are accounting for 64% of new business. Word of mouth in the entertainment industry is incredibly powerful when you're delivering genuine value." My mother appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries with the attention to detail that had made her such an effective hostess throughout her marriage to a successful businessman. She had adapted to the expanded family business operations with remarkable grace, taking on coordination responsibilities that freed the partners to focus on strategic development rather than administrative details. "I hope you don't mind the interruption," she said, setting the refreshments on the side table, "but I thought you might appreciate some sustenance during your planning session." Amanda accepted coffee with genuine gratitude, having developed real appreciation for my mother's organizational skills over the months of working together. The relationship between my family and Marcus's business partner had evolved into mutual respect and even friendship, built on shared commitment to excellence and attention to detail. "Mrs. Mitchell, have you given any more thought to my suggestion about formalizing your role in the company?" Amanda asked. "Your client relationship management instincts are exceptional, and we could benefit from having someone with your skills in an official capacity." My mother's cheeks colored slightly with pleasure at the recognition, though she maintained her characteristic modesty. "I'm happy to help however I can, but I'm not sure I have the business background for a formal position." "Experience matters more than credentials," Marcus interjected. "Some of the most effective business developers I've worked with learned their skills through practical application rather than academic study." The conversation continued as we reviewed financial reports and discussed expansion strategies, but I found myself observing the interpersonal dynamics more than focusing on the business details. The transformation in family relationships over the past 6 months had been as dramatic as the company's growth, with genuine warmth and mutual respect replacing the careful politeness that had characterized previous interactions. Jessica arrived during the discussion of technology integration services, having driven down from Nashville specifically for the quarterly meeting.
Her role as digital strategy director had evolved beyond anyone's expectations, with her social media marketing instincts translating perfectly to helping entertainment industry clients navigate digital revenue opportunities. The streaming music analytics project is exceeding all expectations, she announced, taking her seat and immediately diving into the business discussion. 3 major record labels have asked us to expand our services to include artist development consulting, which could represent substantial revenue growth. Marcus leaned forward with interest, his strategic thinking clearly engaged by the possibilities Jessica was describing. Artist development consulting would position us perfectly for the next phase of industry evolution. Digital platforms are changing how artists build careers, and most traditional industry professionals don't understand the new dynamics well enough to provide effective guidance. Exactly, Jessica agreed, her enthusiasm evident as she outlined opportunities she had identified through client interactions. We could become the bridge between traditional industry expertise and digital age realities. The discussion continued for another hour, covering operational details and strategic opportunities that would have seemed impossibly ambitious just 6 months earlier. The partnership had created momentum that was generating its own expansion possibilities, with client demand driving growth rather than artificial targets or wishful thinking. When the formal meeting concluded, Amanda asked to speak privately with Marcus and my father about a sensitive matter that required discretionary handling. I took the opportunity to walk through the Atlanta office space, observing the daily operations that had become the foundation for my family's transformed business success. The workspace buzzed with focused energy, employees engaged in complex consulting projects that required both financial expertise and entertainment industry knowledge. The hiring process had attracted exceptional talent from across the Southeast, with Williams-Chen Partnership's reputation and competitive compensation packages enabling Williams-Chen to recruit professionals who might otherwise have joined larger firms in New York or Los Angeles. Near the client presentation area, I encountered Maria Rodriguez, the office manager whose organizational skills had been crucial to the smooth startup of Atlanta operations. She was preparing materials for an afternoon meeting with a major streaming music service that was considering expanding their Nashville operations. "Mrs. Williams, how did the board meeting go?" Maria asked, her voice carrying the kind of personal investment that characterized employees who felt genuinely valued by their organization. "Very well," I replied. "The growth numbers continue to exceed expectations, and there is serious discussion about additional expansion opportunities." Maria's expression brightened with obvious pleasure. "That's wonderful news. This has been the most exciting professional experience of my career. The combination of entertainment industry work and cutting-edge technology consulting creates opportunities I never would have imagined." Her enthusiasm reflected what I observed throughout the Atlanta office. Employees who felt energized by challenging work and appreciated for their contributions to something genuinely innovative. The Williams-Chen partnership had provided not just capital, but also a business philosophy that prioritized employee satisfaction and professional development alongside financial success. When I returned to the conference room, I found Marcus and Amanda discussing potential acquisition opportunities with my father and Kevin. The success of the Atlanta expansion had attracted
attention from other entertainment industry service providers who were interested in either partnership or acquisition arrangements. The due diligence process would be extensive, Amanda was explaining, but acquiring a talent management firm could provide vertical integration opportunities that would significantly enhance our consulting capabilities. My father nodded thoughtfully, his expression reflecting the confidence of someone who had learned to think strategically about growth opportunities rather than simply reacting to immediate operational demands. The synergies would be substantial, assuming we could maintain our quality standards while scaling operations. Marcus pulled out his phone to check the time, then looked around the conference room with satisfaction. We should probably begin planning our exit strategy. I have a call with our renewable energy portfolio companies in 30 minutes, and Amanda needs to review the acquisition proposal before our evening board meeting. The casual coordination of complex business responsibilities had become routine, but I still found it remarkable how seamlessly Marcus managed multiple demanding professional obligations while maintaining his commitment to family relationships and personal time. As we prepared to leave the office, Jessica approached me with an expression that carried both excitement and uncertainty. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course."
How did you handle it when you first learned about Marcus's real financial situation? I mean, finding out that someone you thought you knew completely had been concealing something so significant? I considered the question while watching Marcus discuss technical details with one of the consulting team leaders, his easy interaction with employees reflecting the same genuine interest in other people that had attracted me to him originally. I realized that he hadn't been concealing who he was, I said finally. He had been protecting what we had from everything that money can complicate. The person I fell in love with was exactly the same person, regardless of how many zeros were in his bank account. Jessica's expressions suggested she was processing implications beyond simple curiosity about family history. David and I have been talking about our own financial goals and what success actually means. Watching Marcus handle wealth with such grace has made us rethink some of our priorities. The conversation was interrupted by Amanda's approach, her expression indicating that business matters required immediate attention. Marcus, we need to discuss the renewable energy timeline before your call. The acceleration schedule is more aggressive than originally planned. Marcus excused himself to handle the urgent business matter, but not before confirming our evening plans for dinner at home. Despite the demanding schedule of managing multiple complex investments, he had maintained his commitment to protecting our personal time and relationship priorities. The drive back to Nashville provided time for reflection about how dramatically our lives had changed over the past 6 months. Marcus divided his time between the Atlanta office, his Nashville home office, and business travel that sometimes took him to portfolio companies across the country. But he had insisted on maintaining our East Nashville residence and our commitment to spending meaningful time together without business distractions. "Do you ever miss the simplicity?" I asked as we merged onto Interstate 24 for the drive home. Marcus considered the question while navigating through Atlanta traffic, his expression thoughtful but not nostalgic. "Sometimes I miss the anonymity," he admitted, "but I don't miss watching your family struggle to accept something that should have been straightforward." The honesty of his answer reminded me that the past 6 months had brought benefits beyond business success. Family gatherings had become genuinely enjoyable rather than exercises in diplomatic navigation, with conversations flowing naturally between personal and professional topics without underlying tension about Marcus's place in the family hierarchy. That evening, as we prepared dinner together in our familiar kitchen, Marcus's phone remained turned off despite several missed calls that probably represented urgent business matters requiring his attention. His commitment to maintaining boundaries between professional responsibilities and personal time had become even more important as his business obligations had grown more complex. Amanda mentioned that the renewable energy portfolio is considering public offerings for 3 companies. That must require significant coordination efforts. Marcus nodded while stirring the pasta sauce, his movements carrying the relaxed efficiency of someone who had found genuine satisfaction in domestic routines. The market timing is favorable, but public offerings require extensive preparation and regulatory compliance. We'll probably be working 16-hour days for the next several weeks. Will that impact the Mitchell & Associates expansion planning? Not significantly. Amanda will handle most of the renewable energy coordination while I focus on the entertainment industry consulting development. We've learned to divide responsibilities based on our individual expertise areas. The conversation continued over dinner, covering both business developments and personal topics in the comfortable blend that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. Marcus shared insights about technology trends that could impact entertainment industry clients, while I described my observations about how the Atlanta office culture was developing. After dinner, we walked through our East Nashville neighborhood, observing the gradual changes that had occurred as the area continued attracting young professionals and artists. Our modest duplex had become somewhat anachronistic among the renovated properties in new construction, but Marcus had resisted suggestions that we should upgrade to something more befitting his financial status. Mrs. Park asked if we're planning to move to Belmead. She seemed concerned that we might abandon the neighborhood now that everyone knows about your business success. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. Mrs. Park has been tracking real estate values in this area for 30 years. She probably knows exactly how much our property has appreciated since we moved in. And she's probably calculated whether the appreciation justifies staying versus upgrading to a mansion in a more prestigious neighborhood. Mrs. Park understands that home value involves more than just financial considerations. This neighborhood has character.
Community connections that can't be purchased with money. The observation reflected Marcus's consistent philosophy about wealth and lifestyle choices. Despite having the resources to afford virtually any luxury, he had maintained the same preferences for authenticity and genuine connection that had shaped his decisions before his financial success became public knowledge. When we returned home, Marcus finally checked his phone messages, responding to the most urgent communications while I reviewed work emails from my own job. The parallel routine of handling professional responsibilities while sharing domestic space had become comfortable and familiar, proof that our relationship could adapt to changed circumstances without losing its essential character. Before going to bed, we sat on our back patio, sharing a bottle of wine and discussing plans for the upcoming weekend. Marcus's parents were visiting from Chicago, and my family was hosting a barbecue that would bring together both sides of our extended family for the first time since our wedding 3 years earlier. "Are you nervous about the family integration?" I asked, knowing that large group gatherings could be challenging, even under the best circumstances. Marcus considered the question while watching fireflies blink across our small backyard. "More excited than nervous," he said finally. "Your family has learned to see me as myself rather than as their preconceptions, and my parents are looking forward to getting to know them properly." The upcoming gathering would represent the complete transformation of family relationships that had begun 6 months earlier with revelations about Marcus's true financial status. But more importantly, it would celebrate the genuine connections that had developed based on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence rather than obligation or social expectation. As we prepared for bed, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The past 6 months had proven that Marcus's patience in waiting for the right moment to reveal his wealth had been wise, allowing family relationships to develop authentically rather than being distorted by premature knowledge about his financial resources. The Mitchell & Associates partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations, establishing the company as a leader in entertainment industry technology consulting while providing learning opportunities that had enhanced every family member's professional capabilities. But more significantly, the partnership had created the foundation for genuine family relationships built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence rather than obligation or social expectation. "Thank you," I said quietly as we settled into our familiar bedroom. "For what this time?" "For having the wisdom to wait for the right moment and the courage to trust that everything would work out properly." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could sense his smile in the darkness. "Thank you for making the wait worthwhile." The next morning would bring new challenges and opportunities as Williams Chen Capital Management continued expanding its portfolio while Mitchell & Associates explored additional growth possibilities. Marcus would need to balance increasing demands on his time and attention with his commitment to maintaining our relationship as his first priority. But those challenges would be manageable because they were built on the foundation of genuine partnership we had established during our first 3 years together. We had learned to communicate honestly about difficult topics, to support each other through external pressures, and to maintain our individual identities while building shared success. The money had made some things easier and other things more complicated, but it hadn't changed the fundamental dynamics that made our marriage work. Marcus still made coffee exactly how I liked it, still listened to my concerns without trying to fix everything, still treated our relationship as more important than any business opportunity. And I still saw him as the man who had chosen to build a life with me based on love rather than convenience, who had protected our connection from external complications even when it required significant personal restraint, and who had demonstrated that authentic success meant more than just financial achievement. The story of how the Mitchell family learned to see past their assumptions about worth and status had become part of Nashville's social legend, but for us, it was simply the beginning of building the future we wanted together. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come disguised as ordinary choices, and sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in recognizing exceptional value that everyone else has overlooked. Marcus had given my family the opportunity to learn those lessons, and they had finally been wise enough to embrace the education. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.
Just click and check them out.